Here is our Zenith 801, and I appreciate all the questions and comments we regularly get from our posts on YouTube, and we figured we'd make a little video to answer the questions that come on a regular basis. So this is that video. We'll tell you about all the things we did different as opposed to just about the aircraft you can find out online. We'll start with the outside of the airplane. This is my wife Susie, it's her airplane. And we put her next to the plane so you can get an idea of how big the plane actually is. Everybody's used to the Zenith 701, the two-seat version. The 801 and 701, though they look similar, are nowhere even close in size. This is a very big airplane. You'll also notice that the tires are not just much bigger than the 701, but we put on extra large tires so that we could actually take it into the back country. One thing you'll notice right off the bat is the side and rear windows are tinted. Visibility out of them is completely unaffected, but it really keeps the sun off and makes it more comfortable. The back windows being tinted the most, and then the side windows a little less. But most importantly is the top window, which you'll be able to see better later, is tinted so that when you're deep in those canyons you still have visibility to the cliffs and walls as you're flying around the canyons and mountains, but you don't have that sun beating you to death. And it's sad to see people build airplanes like this and then put a permanent sunshade up and can never really look out the top because the heat's so bad. But with the tinted top window as an option, it's a much more comfortable aircraft to fly in. Another thing I want to point out as you're at the back of the airplane that we get a lot of comments on is it does not have the typical 801 slanted tires. You'll notice the tires on both sides are completely vertical, and that's with the aircraft currently full of fuel. And this airplane does have 60 gallons of fuel, 4 gas tanks, you see them on the top, where most 801s only have 30 gallons of fuel with 2 gas tanks. Right now this plane's full of fuel and you can put people in it and the wheels sit correctly. We did that by adding 2 degrees of bend in the landing gear, had it redone at those 2 bend points, and from what I understand Zenith is now doing that to all their 801s so that they don't have that, what I think is a very ugly tires leaning out look. On the back of the aircraft we get a lot of comments on this. Normally the tail of this airplane, there's no fairing here at all. In fact, you can see right through this airfoil and out the other side, daylight, which makes it look very experimental instead of finished. The other problem with that is the air would go underneath that wing, and you can see the tail on the 801 is an upside down flying wing. The air would go underneath that wing, hit the mount point on the back here where it attaches, it goes solid all the way through. And so the air would come underneath this wing between the fuselage or empennage, the tail, and the stabilizer, and all that air would shoot across the top of here and would dump all the lift. And so a lot of 801s have had to build that tail 2 feet wider so they can lift the nose of the airplane off the ground. And our theory was the tail was originally designed the right width, and it wasn't lifting the nose off the ground because you had a perfect low pressure dump designed into the back of the airplane. And the theory proved to be accurate. Once we built this fiberglass fairing, not only does it look a lot better, we got more airspeed, we got rid of a whistle in the airframe that was really loud and obnoxious, and most importantly, we can pull the nose of this airplane off the ground at only 30 miles an hour. And a lot of guys with the 2 foot wider tail, which adds weight and certainly drag, still can't pull the nose of their 801 off the ground until 40, 45 miles an hour. And that's because our airfoil back here is not disturbed by dirty air. Aside from the fiberglass fairing built onto the back, we did a lot of other fiberglass mods to the airplane to clean it up and make it more effective. Here on the flaperon, there's normally metal right here. It's very sharp. On more than one occasion, someone walking through my hangar during the build process sliced their head on it, and so we faired it in. It's a lot cleaner. The metal flaps that are there that are normally riveted together are still underneath there, so we didn't change it structurally at all, other than maybe making it stronger, but certainly made it look better. You'll also notice around the doors, the 801s normally are wind machines. When the doors are closed, all kinds of air comes in the side, right here. Well, this fiberglass piece was added all the way around, custom made, to rivet onto the door and completely close it up. And so wind's not blowing in the door, and it gives it a much more finished look than your regular 801. Big mod in that regard was up here on the windshield. This fiberglass piece here was built, and it's attached permanently on the front. There's no holes through the glass, so it won't break the glass. On top of that, one of my favorite things we did on this airplane was got rid of that thin windshield. And that took a lot of work to do and to have this windshield made, but they usually have I believe it's an 1/8 inch thick windshield, and they're almost always cracked, especially up in these corners. And you can see how nice and tight we are up in the corners of the window. They're almost always cracked. They crack here, they crack up at these pinpoints, they crack down in here. And they're so thin that when you're flying, the wind is pushing on it and buffeting it, and it actually wobbles in the middle. We went to a windshield that's twice as strong. It's thicker by 50%, which gave it almost double the strength. It doesn't wobble or blow in the wind. It's much quieter, and I can attest it can handle a bird strike. We've had a bird strike, and it just bounced off the windshield instead of coming through. I'm sure there's birds big enough to come through it. But having a windshield that can handle the wind and the noise and not crack, and after a few hundred hours of flying now, not having any cracks in this windshield and not having any leaks and having this fairing all the way around and perfectly sealed and never any lifting or separating, would attest to the fact that the bigger windshield and taking the extra time and money to build this fairing around here gives you an airplane that feels more like a certified aircraft as opposed to a garage built. Back to the landing gear real quick. A few 801 drivers in extreme off dirt strip landing have bent their gear right above the point where the brakes attach. You'll see I did dual calipers to give me extra stopping power, and then you can see a stainless steel plate reinforcement on the gear right over the area that people have bent their gear. And we have had no problems, and I would suspect that maybe some of those landings were really hard. You can see those 8 bolts on that plate, but we figured it was worth the tiny bit of extra weight so that if there was a really bad landing, we wouldn't have a gear broken or bent in the backcountry. You'll also notice we chose to tap and thread all the mount points of the brake line on the landing gear so that it wouldn't ever flop or get caught by weeds and stuff off-field, where normally they just give you a sticker and it's basically glued to the side, and within the first 10 hours of flight you'll see the brake lines flaring in the wind, and we didn't feel comfortable with that, so our brake lines are firmly, securely attached, tapped and threaded. One of my favorite modifications on this plane is we got rid of the banana slots. Normally right here there's a connection rod connects here to the flaperons, and a banana slot that comes all the way down like this, and it's a hole in your airplane so your flaperons can come down and be maneuverable. What we did is put a bearing in here, put a bell crank on the other side, and encased it completely in. We'll show you on the inside in a minute. But now you don't have wind and rain coming in the side of the airplane. But even more importantly than that, these 801s, because of how they attach to the wing with this piece of metal here, they don't have a lot of lateral stability. And so if you grab the flaperon and shake it side to side, you can actually slap it into the side of the airframe right here, and it'll bang into the paint and scratch, and I just don't think it's good to have that flapping around and banging, and especially when you're coming into land, to hear that banging into the side of the airplane and scratching up and down here. But with this bearing and bell crank setup, you can shake it all you want. All you're going to do is wiggle the airplane, and so you have a perfect connection. But a lot of people ask how we did that, how we got the bearing placement perfect. It was really quite easy. We came down here to the end of the wing and shot a laser through all the holes and to put a spot where to center that bearing. There's no binding at all. It flows perfectly and freely and is much stronger and more stable and secure, and certainly looks better. One thing that surprised me that we get asked a lot about, especially by other 801 builders that have seen our plane, is how we got the aluminum on the wing so straight and no ripples or bumps between ribs, and perfectly flat and straight all the way across the top of the wing. You know, I've built other airplanes, and we all build on flat tables, and we're all meticulous and work really hard to make sure they're perfectly flat and don't have those bumps and ripples. But I think what made the difference is we made sure as we built the wings that they were in a controlled temperature. We built the entire airplane in a heated facility that was at 72 degrees every time we worked on it. It was never 50 degrees one day when we're drilling holes and 80 degrees another time a few months later. It was always exactly the same temperature, and so the metal wasn't able to expand or shrink between different phases of the project. And I believe that's why our wings have ended up so perfectly straight and flat even after a couple 100 hours of flying. There's not a ripple in the wing anywhere. It just looks as factory new. In fact, that's not a good example. Certified factory airplanes, if you look at the top of the wing, you don't find them this flat. And I think building in a completely perfectly controlled environment makes a big difference in maintaining your temperature. Okay, performance modifications. We talked about the tail, which gave it a significant better performance, especially in its ability to lift the nose up. The big wings on these airplanes with those big slats, they don't really stall ever. The tail usually stalls first. Putting the fairing back here made a big difference. You'll also see here, when I lift the elevator, there are VGs. Right at that point when you're in the flare, the heaviest flare, there's VGs, because when we put strings on this tail to see what was happening with the air, we could see the air was separating when you had the elevator all the way back. And so what was happening is the tail would stall before the wing did and drop the nose. Another speed mod on this plane was these fairings. Now the kit comes with an aluminum fairing to go over these round bars. Round bars are the most draggy thing on the planet. A 2x2 has less, a square 2x2 deck baluster railing has less wind drag than a 1-inch round tubular bar. And so, but the reason we didn't put the metal fairings on here, airfoils that came with it, is because the trailing edge was so sharp I was worried about people cutting it, and they rivet all the way along the back side, and I thought that was rather ugly. And so we went with these vinyl fairings, and it actually gave us 10 miles an hour indicated airspeed change. And that was, it only took us a day to install them, and I flew it the morning we were going to install them at a specific altitude, fuel flow, and power setting. The next day I went out the same time in the morning, same temperature, altitude, fuel flow, power setting, and I gained 10 miles an hour by putting the airfoils over these round bars. So they look a lot better, they're not going to cut anybody's head, and they're certainly faster than just leaving the round tubes. Performance and engine. This is a turbocharged and intercooled Lycoming 360 cubic inch. It's got a Bendix fuel injection Ray J turbo, and believe it or not, it never ever gets hot. All the 801 guys struggle like crazy, and I've been on the phone with a lot of guys trying to figure out their heating. Well, a lot by comparison to how many 801s are out there. It's not like a lot, but heating is a challenge. Some of the things we did, I'm the only turbocharged one out there, but this lip on the bottom, we rebuilt that at least a dozen times, getting exactly the right angle and position.